For the second day in a row, Ontario education workers are on the picket lines. 55,000 workers walked off the job Friday after the provincial government used the notwithstanding clause to pass legislation forcing them to accept a new contract. The government is before the Ontario Labour Board arguing the strike breaks the law, but union leaders say the job action will continue until they get a fair deal. Well, for more on the province's attempt to prevent the strike, we're joined by Ontario's Education Minister, Stephen Lecce. Minister, I know it's been very busy for you. Appreciate you taking some time this afternoon. I want to start by playing you a clip of the Prime Minister from yesterday.
It is a very, very serious thing to suspend people's fundamental rights and freedoms. The proactive use of the notwithstanding clause is actually an attack on people's fundamental rights, and in this case is an attack on one of the most basic rights available, that of collective bargaining.
So, very basic question to start. Do you agree that by using the notwithstanding clause, you suspended basic rights and freedoms of workers in Ontario to force a contract?
Hi, Travis. Good to be with you. First off, we believe in advancing the rights of children who have gone through an extraordinary difficulty in this pandemic. Children have a right to be in school, and I know that their parents are depending on government to do everything humanly possible using all the tools that our Parliament has at our disposal to bring an end to this illegal strike and simply to get kids back into the classroom. And so we are advancing that principle vigorously. But for the Ontario Labour Relations Board, we're using all tools, because I just think after this pandemic, after the disruption, after the hardship on mental and physical health, the message we're sending is enough. We're going to stand up for kids and do whatever we can using every tool to bring it into this and get some stability in the classroom.
And I appreciate that, Minister, and I understand our time is limited with you, so I do want to get through a number of points here. But that was not the question. The question was about the use of the notwithstanding clause. Everybody watching this agrees that students should be in school, but it's the use of the notwithstanding clause and the basic rights of workers to strike and to have collective bargaining in this province that the government seems to have undermined here. Do you agree with that fact?
Travis, on Sunday, the union decided to strike before they even knew of legislation that included that provision of the Constitution. Their intention all along was to strike and impose hardship on children. That happened just 3 years ago. We are standing up for their right to learn, to be in school, for parents to go to work, and to have some normalcy after the most extraordinary impact on human history on kids. It is the responsible act to use every tool available to government, because we know the impacts of the pandemic on children. It's why we brought forth legislation on Monday, after the union decided to proceed with the strike. I just want to be very clear here. The intention all along of the union, going back to the summer, where they announced a strike mandate before the government even brought forth our first proposal. This is what they wanted to do, and we gave them an off-ramp. We urged them, let's work on a voluntary deal, right up until the hour before the bill passed. They wouldn't take a strike off the table. The government was forced to move forth legislation. And now, of course, we're going to use the tools to enforce that law and ensure the kids get back to class.
Okay, Minister, forced to move forward with the legislation, but the question is, which I saw you were asked this a couple of times in news conferences, and you didn't answer specifically, so I'm hoping you get a specific answer from you. When did the government begin discussing using the notwithstanding clause? When did you start drafting the legislation? Because legislation, as you know, does not happen overnight.
Yeah, the only time that this was really discussed was once the union put the province on a 17-day strike notice. As you know, and for some watching, the requirement of the union to give a 17-day no board report, then it could be either an additional 5 days or within those 17 days that the union could invoke their 5-day requirement to strike, which is what they did on Sunday.
So you started drafting, to confirm, you started drafting the legislation when?
We started looking at options after that 17-day option began. The government then started to look at what options do we have should, God forbid, the union proceed with the strike, because frankly, we don't have, as you know, we don't have tolerance for disruption. We made it very clear in the summer through the plan to catch up, kids have to stay in school. We committed to the people of Ontario normal, stable, enjoyable schools. This strike on the basis of a nearly 50% increase in compensation, 33% in salary increases alone on Sunday when they decided to strike. And I just think that is unfortunate and unfair on kids. And that's why we introduced the bill. It's why we're going to use the tools at our disposal to help create some end to this. It's just
the cost of living, Minister, the cost of living has reached a 40-year high. Inflation, as you know, is going through the roof, 7 or 8%. We've heard from education workers who are paid poorly, so poorly they have to use the food bank right now. Is it right that workers who do essential jobs educating children are struggling to live and don't have the ability to do that with a living wage to keep up with the cost of living in this province?
So first off, the average worker, a CUPE worker in Ontario makes $27 an hour. It's north of 32 in Ontario, in Toronto. And I'm answering your question because I'm providing the financial context of what they make and their entitlement program. In addition to $27 an hour on average, because these numbers you cite, Travis, and the union cite include part-time workers, which draw down the averages. $27 an hour, they're the highest paid in Canada. They are the highest paid against any sector in Ontario. Banking, transportation, colleges, hospitals, we pay our staff for the equivalent job more. In addition, I would just make clear, most people don't have a pension that is connected to or tied to inflation. Most people don't have health benefits for their family. Most folks, of course, as you know, wouldn't have access to 131 sick leave days. When you look at the program we're offering, because this is, when you're asking the question, the competitive nature of the job, it is well ahead of the rest in the nation and in the province. Now, we recognize the cost of living challenge, which is why we proposed 10% over 4 years while maintaining the pensions, benefits, and sick leave. And I do believe that is competitive and it is fair, it is affordable. But what we will stand up against is when a union believes they could put their own interests ahead of those of children. And that's why we brought forth this bill on Monday.
Minister, and I know that the union disputes the numbers. They say that the average is far lower than you're talking about here. Even $45,000, is that enough to live in the city of Toronto, in Hamilton, in Ottawa? I know that you're saying that they're the best paid workers, education workers in the country, but also the cost of living in Ontario is much higher than other parts of the country.
Yeah. Yeah, the average would be $49,000, in fact. But the point, in short, is just to simply recognize, because you're raising the point that of the challenges they face, they would have unique advantages over other people in the economy watching today who don't have benefits or pensions or don't have sick days that cover, literally 11 of them are 100% coverage, 120 and 90% coverage, Travis. Look, I respect the workers. They make a difference. I remember those workers in my life in the schools I went through. And I want to thank them for what they do. We're offering them a program that increases their pay every year, maintains pensions, benefits, sick leave, and job security, which most folks, particularly during the pandemic, did not have. So we do believe what we're offering is fair. We think it is unacceptable to strike, and we're going to use the tools available to government to bring an end to this. Allow these kids to go back because the hardship they have faced is quantifiable. The mental health issues, the physical health, it's real.
And I think that a lot of educators in this province understand that, but also they're concerned about workers' rights. When you have unions like LUINA, IBEW, the Ontario Professional Firefighters Association, coming out and supporting CUPE and saying that it was not right for the government to use the notwithstanding clause here, are you underestimating the labor movement in this province as a whole?
What's not right is for a union to decide 2 months into an established routine of children that they can put millions of kids out on strike, that they can impose hardship in addition to all the struggles they faced over the past 2 to 3 years. Remember, there were strikes in Ontario uniquely in this province by the education unions just perhaps 3 years ago. Then a pandemic hit. At what point, and I mean this, at what point does a government say on behalf of its people, its parents, its kids, and the staff too, enough? These kids should be in school. We could have a spirited debate on salaries, because that's what this comes down to, Travis, fundamentally. The union acknowledged it. They, quote, want a, and I quote from the president, a significant pay raise. We're offering 10 points. That's ahead of most individuals watching in the private sector, the increases they'll get, closer to 1.9%. Ours is 2.5. And so my point in short is we are going to maintain a very competitive program that is fair, but we will use every tool available to us to simply allow these kids to be in school. We urge the union to avoid getting to the point of legislation. We brought them in on Sunday when they announced their strike. because they were chasing nearly 50% in compensation, 33% in pay. There's no debate there. 11.7% every single year over the course of the program, and we're talking about a 4-year deal.
Minister,
so we are standing up for children.
We are out of time. I'm going to try to sneak one more in, and I appreciate you sticking around for as long as you have. There are a lot of concerns right now, and there's this discussion going on about whether or not this government is moving education in this province towards privatization. You know, there was an article in one of the papers talking about the voucher system. Is that something on the agenda? Because that is certainly what we are hearing from a lot of educators, that is what the direction they think that this government wants to go.
Travis, let's not be preposterous. Let's not be ridiculous here. We've increased investments in publicly funded schools by $650 million this year alone. We're spending $3 billion more than Kathleen Wynne did at the peak of spending in 2017. We've increased mental health funding in schools by 420%, $550 million just to build new schools this year, in sharp contrast to the Liberals who closed 600 over their program of 15 years. We are firmly committed to quality public education. We have 7,000 more education workers hired under our progressive conservative government, nearly 1,000 more teachers. We know the role of education. It can literally change the course of a child, of a human being, of a worker. It is incredible what we do in our schools, and I'm proud of what we do in our schools. Mm-hmm. I just simply insist that kids are in school so that they can catch up after an extraordinary challenge. And I want to thank the workers, and I want to express a great deal of gratitude to the people who work with our kids, our parents, our staff, everyone in our communities. They make a difference, and we will stand up for them to make sure their kids could be in class.
All right, Minister, appreciate you sticking around for the extra minute or two there. I know that we were limited on time, but thank you for taking the time this afternoon. That is Ontario Education Minister Stephen Lecce speaking to us from Vaughan, Ontario. Well, to get her perspective, we're now joined by Laura Walton. She is the president of CUPE's Ontario School Board Council of Unions and also an educational assistant. Laura, thank you for joining us. I know you were listening in to the Minister of Education there. What stood out to you?
Well, what stood out for me is just how disconnected this minister is from how labor negotiations happen, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector. The fact that they were working on this legislation before any strike notice was provided should tell the people of Ontario all you need to know. They had no intent to ever bargain in good faith. As a matter of fact, coming to a table and saying, if you do not remove your right to strike, then we're not going to be bargaining, is really the definition of bad faith bargaining. So I have huge concerns when I hear that. My heart just sinks, because we should be always going into this with open minds, open hearts, and, using our ears. And yet, here they have a team that was working harder on legislation than they were on negotiations.
To the minister's point, though, did CUPE move too quickly to strike?
I really don't think so, Travis. And you'll remember in 2019, in fact, we were about the same kind of timeline. We served notice to bargain on June 3rd. The earliest day that we were able to serve notice. As a matter of fact, we put a letter into the Ministry of Education asking, as per the School Board Collective Bargaining Act, to start bargaining early. That was denied by this minister. We were looking at this as, let's get negotiating before school goes back. That was our intent. There was a series of delays, of stalling tactics, single days of bargaining. It just became so clear from the very beginning. There was another agenda at play, one that was not on the table, and now we all know what it was.
I want to talk to you about the money aspect of all of this, because there are fines that are looming. The union has money, and I know that you are getting donations from other unions, but that money is not endless. And also, at a certain point, your workers are on strike pay right now, which I think is $60 a day. At what point does the money become a factor here, and this is not sustainable for the workers that are on strike pay, and also fines that could possibly be imposed?
Well, I'm going to speak first to the strike pay piece. I think, what folks need to understand is, for a great deal of our workers, for those who are already off only work 10 months of the year and are off on EI, our strike pay is almost equivalent to what they receive when they're having EI. The other thing folks should keep in mind is that the vast majority of our workers, right, over 50% of our workers, have second and third jobs already. They cannot rely on their work at schools as their only source of income. They're not relying on strike pay as their only source of income. So that's the one thing I just want to be very clear. This is much different for these low-paid workers than it would be for other workers, throughout the workforce. I think the other thing that we need to consider when we talk about the fines is why exactly is this government so fixated on punishing the lowest paid in the province? To me, I think the real question is, what are they trying to hide? What are they so desperate about? Just having kids in schools, that's housing kids in a building. What really makes schools are the people, the workers. And quite frankly, listening to the minister say, I thank these workers,
Right.
That's all well and good. But these workers cannot pay rent with thank yous. These workers cannot pay their bills with thank yous. These workers can't put food on the table with thank yous. And quite frankly, thank yous just do not go far enough. It's time that they are paid fairly.
Yeah, and I certainly understand that, and I think a lot of people sympathize with the cost of living rising. However, an 11% raise does seem somewhat high to start negotiating with. And the minister's point in previous negotiations, and I think he would have that point in this one as well, is that if you are the first union that he's negotiating with, and it's 11%, that becomes the bottom for all of the other unions to ask for that come after your negotiations as well. What would you say to that point?
Exactly to that point is why we went in with a flat rate and not a percentage, because the flat rate is applied regardless of income level. So $3.25 whether you make $15 an hour, $3.25 if you make $40 an hour. So therefore it isn't a percentage. And as a matter of fact, it actually equals out the playing field because the workers get the same amount of money regardless of their income. For some reason, that was very hard for this government to understand. And instead they're going to apply, percentage increases, which means that those that are higher paid are going to be receiving more of an increase than those that are lower paid. We know that when the minimum wage goes up, for instance, it goes up by a flat rate. Why? Because that's what's most impactful for folks at a lower income level. He could have taken the flat rate. He could have moved it along to any other sector union and applied it in that way. There was obviously, I keep saying it again and again, obviously a clear agenda, and the agenda is to strip away workers' rights. And the bill just proves it. I
asked the minister that question about at the end there that you probably heard about the direction where all of this is going, and he denied, what some education workers believe, that this is headed towards privatization. That's kind of a conspiracy theory. I mean, what is your take on that and the road that we're on here in Ontario?
Well, what my take is that in the last 4 years since, Minister Lecce has become, the education minister, we have seen several times where he has provided direct payment to parents out of the public education funds of cash. And those are privatization payments because that's money that could be invested in our schools for services. And it's downloading that work onto parents to go and source that work out themselves instead of collectively putting it together to provide additional EA supports or provide additional mental health supports, ECE supports. As a matter of fact, the amount of money set aside right now for the most recent $200 and $250, that would more than pay for an ECE in every kindergarten classroom in the province of Ontario. It would provide more EAs, it would provide more custodians, and instead it's being piecemealed out. That is an attack. That is privatization. And I'm sure others have seen, the recent call for voucher systems. I mean, it seems to us that, this is a government that has taken a page out of John Snowbelin's book, create a crisis, manufacture that crisis, and slide the privatization in. And we don't have to look far. Let's be very clear about that. We see that happening in our healthcare system today. And we know that's the route that they're going down in our healthcare system. And we are going to fight because education and healthcare, those should remain public.
And we got to leave it there. Lots to discuss, but Laura Walton, certainly appreciate you taking the time this afternoon.
Thank you. It was good hearing from you.
Who is the president of CUPE's Ontario School Board Council of Unions and an educational assistant. We reached her in Toronto.